And I would like to bring in my next esteemed guest. He is easily one of my favorite people to talk to, the one and only Richard Wolff, or Professor Richard Wolff. He's Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor at the Graduate Program in International Affairs of the New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work and host of the nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. And it is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism. Professor, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
Yes, I am. Jamal, I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Oh, man, I always enjoy having you. I think I've said before, you have shaped my workable point of view on the issue of economics and how it works in regards to just kind of our daily politics and the daily where we engage. So no, I deeply appreciate you joining me. I want to start with Trump. Since Trump is in the news, there's been the deal between Israel and Hamas. Hopefully that deal sticks. But one of the things that Donald Trump has been talking about is using tariffs as a weapon in order to just shamelessly take territory. I mean, he effectively threatened Greenland. He wanted Canada to be the 51st state. He wanted to steal the Panama Canal. How do you frame this in an economic sense? I know there's geopolitical realities associated with this stuff, but as you listen to a president that is shamelessly talking about taking territory from other countries, Denmark, allies, no less, how do you frame all of this, especially the weapon that he's talking about using, which are tariffs or sanctions?
Well, I think the most important part of my answer is that people understand that Mr. Trump is inheriting the whirlwind. He's inheriting an accumulation of problems for the United States, political, economic, ideological, you name it. And you can't keep faking it. I mean, it can last for a while. You can have the mainstream media keep people unaware of what's going on or give them a really twisted version of the events. But that doesn't change the reality. That keeps marching on. And the reality of the United States that is really what has to be confronted, but hasn't been yet, is that the period of American dominance in the world is over. You know, it begins a century ago. It reaches a peak in 1945 when the end of the World War II, and you know, some of us are old enough to remember at least a little bit about that. That war ended, and every major competitor of the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, they were all destroyed in and by that war, except for the United States. In the early days of the war, we had bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Other than that, no bombs fell here. Whereas in all those other countries I just mentioned, bombs decimated everything. Major cities in most of these countries look like Gaza appears to us on the television screen these days, or the fires in Los Angeles, this wasteland of destruction. So we emerged in 1945 at the end of that war as the king of the hill. There was nobody who could question that the dominant economy in the world was the United States. It had the biggest military built up by the war. It had not been destroyed. The US dollar became the global currency because it was the currency of the country that was on top. Anyone with a sense of history would have known then, and many did, that this was very exceptional in world history. We have not often had a country, among others, that was so dominant, and that the only reasonable expectation would be that over time, the destroyed countries would rebuild. They would see the dominance of the United States and take that to be the target they had to equal or overcome. And true enough, over the last 60 years, roughly, that's what happened. Germany rebuilt. Japan rebuilt. China went from one of the poorest countries on this planet to the superpower number 2 after the United States today and rapidly catching up. Okay, we have to face that. We can't do as a nation what we did in the second half of the 20th century. We can't tell everybody what to do. We can't threaten everybody. Remember, the United States dropped the only nuclear bombs ever dropped on human beings in Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of the war. It was as if to let the world know we got the money, we got the power, and we will use them. So you better do what we need and want. And the world in general did. That's now gone. The Chinese, the European, they've come back and they're taking their share. Let me give you an example from last week about how America as a nation denies this. One of the largest countries in the world is a country called Indonesia. It's a population of 280 million people. It's bigger than Russia. It's almost as big as the United States. It comprises 18,000 islands in the South China Sea area, South Asia, East Asia. They decided to join the BRICS. That's the alliance of nations around China. It's the power block of the world economy. This is one of the biggest countries in the world. That's an enormously important step. Not good for the United States, but very important. Nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have to really search across the mass media of the United States. It's like, well, nothing happened. I don't know what's going on. Nothing. It's bizarre. It's so awful that I have to go around as an economist and explain to people something momentous happened last week. It wasn't just those horrible fires in California, right. And it wasn't just a ceasefire in the Middle East or those issues. It was this other thing. And they look at me and they go, what other thing? That's what the television, that's what the newspaper was full of. Well, I got to tell you, Mr. Trump has got his work cut out for him. He can't bring back the American empire any more than Mr. Biden was able to do that. Right? He can't.
Yeah.
And yet he wants to be the president. So unfortunately, the way America works, if you can't do it, the solution is pretend you're doing it. That's how you do this. And you hope that before people figure it out, you will have packaged your nice gains and go off and retire in Florida. So here we go. How do you cover over to the American people the decline of American power? The fact that you can't do what you thought you could do. Ever since Obama, we have been trying to, quote, contain China. That's one big, fat failure. They weren't contained. They're growing like gangbusters, and they're doing a fine job of economic growth. We decided 3 years ago, we're going to wage a sanctioned war on Russia to punish them for invading Ukraine. That's another fat failure. How many of these can you tolerate? Not many. And you better cover them over with make-believe. Here we go now. How does Mr. Trump produce a theater adequate to the problem he faces? The answer, weird, but now you understand the method in his madness. I'm going to take Mexico and Canada and Greenland and Panama and whoever else I can think of. And we're going to be tough, and you're going to be the 51st state. You think you're a country? Ha ha. What is this about? right? It looks weird. Even in America, people are scratching their heads. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is not crazy because he understands. He won that election by 1% of the vote. He didn't get any mandate. Kamala Harris came very close. Well, he has to pretend. He goes around saying, we have a mandate, a mandate. He hopes, but by saying it over and over again, he offsets the fact that he won by very little. And he offsets the decline of the United States by suddenly brandishing this tough guy attitude. He's going to take over countries all over the world. You know that in Europe, they make the following joke. We are fighting a war with Mr. Putin in Russia, in the Ukraine conflict. And we keep accusing him of having a plan, which, by the way, he has denied 100 times, a plan to expand Russia into taking more parts of Europe.
Right.
We denounce him for what he says. I got no plan. I'm not doing that. I have no military bases anywhere near there. I'm not. No. And here, the very president of the United States, which leads the charge in demonizing Putin, has a brand new president who isn't just talking about one neighboring country. He's talking about half a dozen. I mean, it's caricaturish once you see what's going on. Mr. Trump has got a problem, huge. He's not going to solve it by make-believe. And let me give you, to answer your question, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long.
No, you're fine.
All right, let's turn to the tariffs. Let's understand the theater that's going on here. The Republican Party, of which Mr. Trump is the leader, the Republican Party for a century has positioned itself politically as the party that cuts your taxes. It's gotten lots of people who are upset about the taxes they pay, often understandably so, to vote Republican, even if in other ways they don't like the Republican Party because they want to have their taxes cut.
Mhm.
All right, I'm an economics professor. Let me give you a real hot piece of news. Tariffs are taxes. The tariff is the name of a particular tax. It's not a tax on your income. That's an income tax. And it's not a tax on your spending money. That's a sales tax. It's a tax on importing goods and services. Goods and services produced outside the United States, but brought in and sold to American businesses or consumers. Those are called imports. And a tariff is a tax on the import. So here we have this spectacle of America's number one anti-tax party in putting an enormous stress on, get ready, raising our taxes. When you tax an import, it means that instead of paying, let's say, $30,000 for a Chinese car or truck, so you pay $30,000, those go to the manufacturer in China, and you get the truck. A tariff means that the United States, which right now, as we're speaking, has imposed a 100% tariff on electric cars and trucks imported from China. So the $30,000 truck, that's what the Chinese charge to sell you that truck. You've got to pay 30 grand that go to China and another 30 grand, 100%, that goes to Uncle Sam. The tariff is paid by Americans, not by Chinese. And it goes to the American government. It means that Mr. Trump is the champion raising our taxes, right? The beauty of this is that by fudge, and I'm using the politest term I can think of, by fudge, he's getting Americans to think that somehow The Chinese are going to pay this. They're not going to pay it any more than Mexico paid for the war, for the
That's right.
wall down there. That never
True.
happened either. It's all make believe. It's a kind of cheap theater. Okay, now let's take it the next step. When you have a tariff, it means an American pays a higher price for anything imported than they would have to pay if there were no tariff.
That's
If
right.
there were no tariff right now, you could get what is, by the way, the best electric cars and trucks in the world at the cheapest price, because the Chinese won that competition.
Hmm.
The name of the company in China that you should keep your eyes focused on is the BYD Corporation. 3 letters, initials. They are the producer of the highest quality, lowest price. We've
Yeah.
had a 15-year competition among all the major car companies to be the one to produce electric cars and trucks the best. For a short time, it was Mr. Musk, Tesla. That's over. The Chinese beat him.
Yeah,
Here in
BYD
America,
is really nice. Yeah,
yeah,
I've seen that
here in
one.
America, he's a great hero. But in the rest of the world, they're buying Chinese cars more and more, and his less and less.
Hmm.
Now, Americans don't want to face that. They like the idea that the Chinese are bad and Mr. Musk is an engineering genius. Okay, more theater. Fine. But now let's look. What will be the consequences of this 100% tariff that already exists? Well, the reality is Americans are going to have to pay much more money for these Chinese cars. Most Americans are not going to pay $60,000 for a $30,000 Chinese car. Too much. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to pay 45, 50 grand to get an electric car or truck made by General Motors or Ford or Tesla or Toyota. Not as good a deal as buying that Chinese truck. Better quality, lower price. All the competitors of the United States around the world, they're buying BYD trucks and cars because that's the most efficient. America is losing by this tariff, not
Yeah.
winning, losing. It may be good for Ford and General Motors. They can sell electric cars only because of that tariff. That's why we have it. They went to Mr. Biden, and that's what they got. Mr. Trump may do the same. Looks like he's going to. But in the long run, losing proposition for the United States. But by
You know,
theater, you can get it done. We're smiting the Chinese, and we're tough, and okay. If Americans want, Donald Duck movies instead of reality, be my guest. That's what you're getting. Cheap knockoffs of Donald Duck. It's hopeless. Now, one final example. One of the countries he's going to target, you can see it already, is Mexico.
hmm
Okay, that is really strange. If he's going to give a tariff on Mexico, it means he is breaking 2 treaties. One was called NAFTA, and the other one had another name with different initials. But it's the treaty that combined the economies of Canada, the US, and Mexico. Passed, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and
right.
revised a couple times. But the last time it was changed, Mr. Trump led
That's the
the
one that
change.
came. Yep.
Right. And he signed the agreement, as did the leaders of Mexico and Canada. It's a legally binding, ratified treaty, which he's proposing to what? Violate. He's
Yeah.
breaking the treaty. Canada didn't do that. Mexico didn't do that. Neither of their leaders threatened to. Ours. Well, we don't want it anymore. We are going to hit you with a tariff. Whoa. Now, let me tell you what that means. Many of the major companies in the world pushed for NAFTA for the reasons which everybody knew, including Mr. Trump, that if you can go to Mexico, where wages are much lower than the United States, and produce stuff there, and then move it across the border into the United States without paying a tax, because that's what NAFTA means. We can move goods without paying a tax at the border, then that's what people are going to do.
Mhm.
And that's what happened, including American companies. Give you an example: General Motors, Ford, the very ones who got the tariff against the Chinese, pushed for NAFTA so they could close automobile plants here in the United States, which they have done, and move them to Mexico, which they have done, and pay much lower wages there to produce the Chevy or the Ford Americans are driving today, because once they produced them with low wage workers in Mexico, they could bring those cars and trucks into the United States without paying any penalty, without any tariff between them. They've invested hundreds of billions of dollars. If you put a tariff, all of that is destroyed. Those companies are going to be losing huge investments because they're not going to have the free entry to the United States anymore. And let me tell you what that's going to do. It's going to produce big unemployment in Mexico. Because that game is going to be over. And you know what those companies are going to do? They're not going to come back to the United States. They're going to go to another country that hasn't been hit. In Asia, in Africa, in Latin America somewhere. They're going to just continue this game like a hopscotch. They'll go to Brazil, and then the United States maybe will hit the Brazilians with a tariff, and then they'll move somewhere else. And this has been going on for 40, 50 years. That's not a solution. Yeah, this is just a game of cat and mouse driven by the profit goals of American corporations. Mr. Trump is going to be causing unbelievable turmoil on our border. Mexico is an economy that depends on selling goods to the United States. That's one result of NAFTA. It was understood by everybody, including me at the time of NAFTA, when we argued and debated about it. First time under Clinton, President Clinton. Mm-hmm. So nothing is happening here that should surprise anyone. But the president acts as though the Mexicans have done something to us. That's why we did this.
Right.
All right. So what we got here is, again, I hate to say it, more theater. You have a president who's got an impossible job. How do you manage the decline of the American empire, the decline of the American dream, because you live in a society which makes that a taboo? You can't talk about that. Mr. Trump didn't say a word about that. Neither did Mr. Biden. Neither did Kamala Harris. We all have a conversation about whether trans people can go to the bathroom or not, right? That's what's a big issue in the minds of millions. But what's happening to the American economy, which means what's happening to your job and to the prices you pay in the supermarket, that no.
Can't have that conversation.
So for me, I sometimes feel, and I know my fellow economists, left-wingers, right-wingers, and those in the middle, we all have moments during the day, almost every day, when we scratch our heads and we feel like we're in a weird fun house in some kind of amusement park where the reality has disappeared, and you know the little boat you sit in is in the dark, and suddenly weird monsters jump out at you. You have to hold on to your brain, otherwise you become one of them.
Well, I will tell you this. Considering Joe Biden got rid of my job, I feel you on that. So there's that. On the other one, Joe Biden's farewell speech. Joe Biden tried to invoke LBJ, I suppose, and he brings up, my fellow Americans, I feel deeply that we are heading towards an oligarchy, and this is a concentration of power of the rich and the billionaire class. And Joe Biden, thinks that this is not necessarily the best area for America to go. Now, he's saying the speech as if he wasn't president for the last 4 years and that he didn't have any impact on that at all, right? Or that Kamala Harris didn't have more billionaires backing her than Donald Trump. So, it's a bit rich. This is
so if I could retranslate what you just said, Jamal, you're saying what I said. You feel like you're in a weird place where the world is upside down. Mr. Biden, he worsened the tariffs that Trump left for him. He is surrounded by billionaires. He is very comfortable for them. Let me remind everyone, before he became president, Mr. Biden, for most of his adult life, was a senator from the good old state of Delaware. Delaware is the state in the United States where more corporations are listed as having their headquarters because it's the state that is the friendliest to corporate interests. They register there because the taxes and the registration and the regulations are less there than anywhere else in the 50 states. He's the senator from corporate America. And how do you get oligarchs? You get them out of corporate America. That's Mr. Musk is a corporate executive. Mr. Bezos is a corporate executive. They're all corporation heads. That's how you become a billionaire. I would take issue with Mr. Biden on one thing. Oligarch, we all should have learned by now. Our oligarchs are people in Russia. Bad billionaires in Russia. We don't have that. We have entrepreneurs. We have captains of industry. We don't have oligarchs. And it is nasty of Mr. Biden to call them by this name. He's not remembering the lesson we should have learned in elementary school. When they're over there, they get a bad name. When they're over here, they're angels.
They're entrepreneurs. Well, he's only saying it because, of course, he's lost. Trump is coming in. Elon Musk has been very close to Donald Trump. And so he is now, now he's aware of the billionaire class. Now he's aware of the oligarchs, as he called them. Last question. We have $36 trillion in debt. That number is mind-blowing to me. Somebody did a stat that said if I gave you $1 every day from the time of Christ, you would never get to $36 trillion. Like, that number is astonishing when you think about it. And we're putting on like $2 trillion every year going forward. Right. And Donald Trump is going to blow that up.
I'm going to put my economist hat on my not yet bald head and make the story even worse. The government is at a level of, I hate to do it, and remember, don't get angry at the messenger. I didn't cause any of this. I'm just describing it. We are at a level, as you rightly say, of governmental debt, the highest in our history by far, and growing spectacularly, and at this mind-numbing $36 trillion. But that's just government debt. We also have in the United States corporate debt. That is the indebtedness of companies who borrow money. That's on top of the government that borrows money. And in addition to corporate debt, we have what in economics is called household debt. Household debt is when we borrow money to buy a home, mortgage debt, that's called. When we borrow money to buy a car, when we borrow money to put our kids through college and university, and finally the debt we carry, in our wallet, the credit cards and all of that. So if you add it up, we are at record levels of debt in all three of them: government debt, corporate debt, household debt. We have no idea what this means. I'm saying this as a professional economist. All it tells us is if we have a problem anywhere in our economy, it's going to spread like the wildfires in Los Angeles. Because, let's assume we have a problem in the auto industry or a problem in growing wheat and corn or whatever it is. All of those producers are carrying loads amount of debt. They're not going to be able to pay their own workers to keep producing because their industry is in trouble. But on top of that, they won't be able to repay their debts. We're seeing, by the way, that now is about to unfold, and there's going to be a whole new problem during this year, and you might want to devote some of your program to it.
Yeah.
We are having half of our office space in our cities is not being rented. After the pandemic, people work from home. You know what that means? It means the landlords in office buildings cannot rent half of their offices. And you know what that means? They can't repay the banks from whom they borrowed the money to build those office buildings. And those banks have to sooner or later, not yet, but under the law, they're going to have to declare that they've lost all this money and they ain't coming back. We have no idea how that's going to play out over the next year. Economists are telling Mr. Trump, do something, because they know it's like a tsunami coming off the ocean and about to hit us, a credit tsunami, you might call it. So our indebtedness problem is severe. Now, let me give you a second example, because Americans don't know this. The two largest creditors of the United States, the two largest entities that lend the money to the United States government, making up that 36 trillion, are Japan, that's number one, and the People's Republic of China, that's number two. China has lent the United States government around $800 billion. That's almost 1 trillion out of the 36. Japan has lent even more. Well, if you are a creditor of the United States, then the United States not only owes you that money, but they have to pay you interest every year on that loan, like on any other loan. Which means, my fellow Americans, that we are paying taxes to Washington, all of us, on our income. Every time we put a gallon of gas in our car, every time we drink a glass of beer, we are paying taxes to the United States government. And you know what the United States government is doing with a portion of them? Sending them to the People's Republic of China, which says thank you and uses the money to improve their military. And we are paying for it. That's how the geniuses that run the United States government, Republican and Democrat alike, have managed our affairs. If we didn't borrow like this, if we taxed corporations and the rich the way we ought to, then the government wouldn't have to borrow. Let me conclude with that. That's the biggest scam of all. The corporations and the rich go to the government and they get tax cuts. The biggest one in recent history, Mr. Trump in December of 2017 got the biggest tax cut. Proud of it.
Yep.
Okay, if you cut the taxes on corporations and the rich, which we do in America, then the government doesn't have enough money to keep the roads going, to manage the harbors, to help the people going to graduate school or whatever else, Social Security, all of it. So what does the government do? It borrows. In order to keep doing what it has to do, it borrows because it can't get the rich to pay their taxes. But who does it borrow from? Answer, corporations and the rich. The mass of Americans can't lend money to the government. They're in debt themselves. So the corporations and the rich get their taxes cut and then send that money that they don't have to pay in taxes and lend it to the government that didn't tax them. So for the rich and the corporations, this is a no-brainer. Instead of paying taxes where you have to say goodbye, you paid your taxes, the money is now in the hands of the government. No, 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 no. We'll lend it to you. Then you have to give it back to us. And while we wait, you got to give us interest. A country that manages its affairs like that deserves ridicule, not respect, ridicule, because this is a way that this system serves the rich at our expense in such a way that the real final question is, how in the world did they get away with that? How do we as the people allow ourselves to be ripped off in this way?
Well, Professor, there's a capitalist that's watching this that is screaming, there is no way you can tax the rich enough to pay back $36 trillion. And I'd like you to answer that before I close it.
Well,
They're
let's
screaming at the camera.
agree.
I know they are. They're like, you can't tax your way out of this. That's what they're screaming.
Right. You can't. Well, but my answer is two things. You taxed your way into it, Jack, so you can try at least to tax your way. How the hell do you think we got into this horrible mess? So let's make a deal. I don't ask for it all to be taken care of overnight. I'm not a child. But let's begin by saying the rich and the corporations have to pay their share of the taxes. And I can quote you Warren Buffett, one of the 5 richest people in America, the head of Berkshire Hathaway, who repeatedly says, to his credit, that there's something wrong in the United States if I pay a lower share of my billionaire's income than my secretary pays on the lousy salary I give her.
Professor, God, man, I always appreciate you and your take on this stuff. You are fantastic. Professor Richard Wolff, he's professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts in Elmhurst and a visiting professor at the Graduate Program in International Affairs for the New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It's available, and with his other books, including, there it is, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor, always appreciate you. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you again, Jamal, not only for inviting me, which I appreciate, but for putting these kinds of ideas out there for people to think about. That's an urgent need in this country, and you are one of the people that leads us in doing that.
Oh, man, thank you for that. I appreciate that. You have a good one. Be safe.
You too.
All right. We are come to the end. We have a few more chats that I want to hit because all chats will be read. And look, as I point out, if you guys dig this content, hit that like button, slam into your fist into that like button. Don't break your computer, but definitely hit that like button with a certain amount of vigor and ferocity. Also, share the content, hit the notification bell. If you find yourself really digging the content, you can support through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. One of my guests asked whether or not I have Patreon. Yes, I do have Patreon. It is at the bottom. It is below. I also have PayPal. If you feel better, you can give through that